I'm Dr. Art McCoy, and it is indeed a pleasure to be with you today. I want to thank you, Gina, for that warm introduction. Thank you, Rich Lightwig, for your leadership. And thank you to the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Observance Committee for this tremendous program and for having me as the 2022 keynote speaker. To the broader BJC community of over 30,000 employees, I want to say we, the community, appreciate you. Myself as a board member for the Children's Hospital, as well as the uncle of a nurse at a BJC hospital, I want to say that we realize that you have been serving us and laboring with love and serving with a purpose. So much so that you are the hands, the feet, and the arms of the creative healing power of God and the only sacred text, Bible, Quran, or Torah, and others that we might ever get to see in action or read through your body, language, and work each day. Thank you. I have up to 20 minutes with you, and I want to make the most of this time, so let's get to work. A crust of bread and a corner to sleep in, a minute to smile and an hour to weep in, a pint of joy for a huge peck of trouble, and never a laugh, but the moans come double. The moans. And that is life. Those words are seared to my soul from Paul Laurence Dunbar. They come from him from when he was a slave, and writing those words after he was a slave and publishing them in his book entitled The Lyrics of a Lowly Life. They share a little glimpse of what life was like for him and many others. Nearly 100 years after the American dream was created, through these words, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed with inalienable rights by their Creator that includes life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That dream was not realized for decades, even centuries. After 750,000 people died in a civil war, the black man and woman were simply freed, but it took more progress to have the right to vote. And it wasn't until the 19th Amendment that women acquired and earned the right to vote in 1920. And even still, all the way up to 1963, at the March on Washington, where a young Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King uttered these words. Citizens of color in America today still aren't free. In essence, we've been given a check stamped insufficient funds. But we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. Those words still ring in my heart because that was the essence of the speech that later got coined as the I Have a Dream speech, where Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King described and reimagined the American dream. It shows that it's so important to reimagine the dream because it echoes and rings in our minds still to this day, reverberating to mean things that it didn't even mean when it was originally written and stated in 1776. The terms all men did not mean all men, and it did not include women. It didn't even include poor white men. But reimagining the dream had it become more inclusive. And then 2 years later, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King spoke in a speech in 1965. He said these words, "A great slave preacher uttered words of profound significance." And that slave preacher could have very well been his great-grandfather, Willis Williams, who then fathered A.D. Williams, who then was the one who helped Reverend Martin Luther King Sr. go into ministry, who then had Reverend Martin Luther King. And of course, Reverend Martin Luther King Sr. married A.D. Williams' daughter. So that would be Reverend Martin Luther King's great-grandfather, Willis Williams, the slave preacher. He said these words: "We ain't what we ought to be. We ain't what we want to be. We ain't what we gonna be. But thank God we ain't what we was." Oh, when I think about America, I can say those words apply to America. When I think of just 1 year ago today, or this month, in January 2021, we were having an insurrection on our capital, the first time in the United States history, an insurrection on the Capitol. We ain't what we were. America can say that today when we look at our first female vice president, who became the first female to be sworn in as the United States President of America during President Biden's colonoscopy, where he was under, and we needed the vice president to serve during that time. We're not what we were. When we had our first black president become elected for not just one term in 2008, but 2 terms, and served 2 terms. That being just 8 years after the first time that all the states honored the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's Day that we're celebrating today. That was the first time in 2000, and just 8 years later we had our first African American president. We aren't who we were. Yet and still, we have so far to go because we're not what we want to be. We aren't even who we ought to be. And we're not who we're gonna be. Now, the power of a healing community is one that pushes us to progress, to become better than who we were. The power of a healing community is one that says we must bend the arc of the moral universe towards justice, because I can never be who I ought to be until you are who you ought to be, and you can never be who you ought to be until I am who I ought to be. If the coronavirus hasn't taught us anything, it should have taught us that an invisible virus could bring people to a point to limit their liberties, to lengthen their life. And it could bring us to a point that we understand the inextricable mutuality of humanity. Whatever affects one of us directly affects all of us indirectly, and sometimes directly. And so therefore we have to keep pushing through a healing spiritual power within us that says we can rise above this situation. That we can have the soul force to be a well enough community to help us become better today than we were yesterday. Now, as a work environment, I want to tell you the power of you being an all-inclusive team working so hard to make us well. When you give all that you've given, the world has acknowledged that you as people have enlarged us as a humanity. When you are all inclusive as a team and then give like you've given for nearly 2 years plus now, you say that the best of us does the following essence that all souls want in society and in the world. It's the secret of life. We want to say and know that I see you. Secondly, we want to be supported. I support you. Thirdly, we want to know and be made sufficient. And as an all-inclusive team working hard, and as a work environment, and as citizens in our society, in a healthy community, I see you. It's so important to have the notion of being seen for who we really are, more than the outer me, but the person placed inside of me. I support you, even though it may hurt me, even though it may limit my liberty. These masks and other things, I support you because we are inextricably tied together. And that is our fabric of reality. And you are sufficient. You can make it. You can make it through any time. And if you aren't sufficient, then together we are sufficient. We can do it. When you replace the I in illness with WE, you get we for wellness. The power of a healthy community totally exemplifies the we relationship of not me, myself, and I, but together we can. And so I want to say thank you for having us have a vaccine, because together you did, and we can be better today. Thank you for helping us to make a way to breathe when I can't breathe simplified the words of George Floyd on the ground. It also simplified the words of millions who had a virus that was oppressing and snuffing out their life. Two different powers at work, but the same outcome of death through oppression. You pushed us to a place to progress beyond that through healthcare. And others pushed in courtroom situations to have a place where murderers of George Floyd and the murders of Ahmaud Arbery could be brought to have some accountability. This is what a healthy community does. We look and we say, we're not what we ought to be. We're not what we're even going to be. We're not even what we want to be. But as sure as I breathe, we're not what we was. We're not what we were. Now I want to take you further and say that we as a people have to be called to action. We have to be called to action to be part of the solution. Let me tell you a story. A man asked God to show him a vision of heaven. That man was immediately raptured in a lucid dream into a huge room filled with millions of people around a circular table. And in the center of that huge table was a pot of succulent stew. It smelled good to the millions of people. They were hungry, they wanted some, and they had spoons. And they took their long spoons to dip it into the middle of the table to try to get some of that stew. They smelled it, it smelled good, they were hungry, and each time they would try to bring it to their mouth, the stew would slip out and nothing would be there. And the people were moaning and groaning and having hours to weep in and not even a crust of bread to eat because they couldn't get access to the stew. And the man said, God, I asked you to show me heaven, but clearly this is hell. And immediately God took him out of that room into an even larger room with billions of people around a smaller table but still similarly large. And with an even smaller pot of stew, but that was just as succulent, smelling good. And the individuals had long spoons around the table and they were reaching that spoon across to dip in, to get that stew, and then they would take it out and reach across the table to feed someone else. I want to say that that was heaven, because each of the people, billions, got what they needed. The stew never ran out. The spoons were long enough. And the people were made whole by feeding their sister and brother. I ask you today to be a little bit of that heaven on earth that teaches people how to use a spoon. See, some people don't know how to use their equipment and spoon to help someone else. Sometimes we have to spoon feed our brother or our sister. Some of you do that, helping people in need, in rehabilitation and more. Sometimes we have to build larger spoons. Sometimes we have to come closer to one another, even though there's more of us, billions, so that you can get to know one another, because the distance in some table can make you think that it's a foreign object or something that's not a representation and reflection of you. See, a healthy community that's an all-inclusive team makes a way out of no way to put others in a position to be helped, because they know it's coming back to you. See, it sounds altruistic, but it's not. Because as you feed someone else is going to use their spoon and feed you. So I ask that you continue to find ways to use your spoon. Continue to find ways to help someone else be spoon-fed. Continue to find ways that people need substance. That is the healing power of a healthy community. It's not about me, myself, and I, but it's about we. It's about Ubuntu, the fact that I am because you are, and you are because I am. Sometimes we have to mask up. Sometimes we have to vax up with vaccines. Sometimes we have to show up and to speak for the unseen. Sometimes we have to stand up and intervene. Sometimes we have to wake up, pray up, stay up, study up, clean up, dress up, confess up, and ultimately sometimes we have to make up. But in all of our doing, remember that the past is in our head. The present is in our hands. And the future is in our hearts. So choose to be a little part of heaven today to make this a better reality. Thank you.